The Dead Man Who Fooled Hitler, Part 1, The Perfect Lie. Imagine changing the course of World War II without firing a single bullet. No battlefield, no army, no secret superweapon, just one dead man floating in the Mediterranean Sea. It sounds like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, but it actually happened. In 1943, British intelligence launched an operation so bizarre that even many historians struggled to believe it at first. Their mission wasn't to destroy German forces, it was to trick Adolf Hitler into moving his own army away from the place where the Allies were about to strike. The success of the plan depended on one impossible condition. Germany had to believe every single detail, including the identity of a man who had never existed. This was Operation Mincemeat, one of the greatest deception missions in military history. A war hanging in the balance. By the beginning of 1943, the Second World War had entered a new phase. The Allies had finally achieved a major victory in North Africa. For the first time in years, they had momentum. Now they needed to bring the war into Europe. Military planners quickly agreed on the next objective, the island of Sicily. Located between North Africa and mainland Italy, Sicily was the perfect stepping stone. Whoever controlled the island could launch attacks directly into southern Europe. But there was one enormous problem. The Germans knew that too. The beaches were heavily defended, coastal guns covered likely landing zones. Thousands of experienced soldiers waited for an invasion. The Allies estimated that a direct assault could become a disaster. Something had to change, not the destination, but what Germany believed about the destination, the birth of an impossible plan. Inside a quiet office in London, members of British naval intelligence searched for ideas. Every conventional deception had already been considered. Fake radio messages, false troop movements, misleading reports. None of them seemed convincing enough. Then one proposal changed everything. Instead of trying to hide information, why not let Germany steal it? Real intelligence officers knew that the most valuable secrets were often discovered by accident. If the Germans believed they had uncovered confidential Allied plans on their own, they would trust the information far more than anything delivered intentionally. The idea was brilliant, but it created an entirely new problem. How could fake invasion plans accidentally fall into German hands? The answer was as disturbing as it was ingenious. They needed a courier who could never reveal the truth, because he would already be dead. Finding the perfect messenger, British intelligence quietly searched for a suitable body. It couldn't show obvious signs of violence. It couldn't raise suspicion. Eventually, they found a man whose cause of death could plausibly match someone who had drowned after an aircraft accident at sea. His real identity remained protected for many years. But from that moment forward, he would become someone else. His new name was Major William Martin, a respected officer of the Royal Marines. Except, Major William Martin had never existed. Everything about him would have to be created from scratch, not just official documents, an entire life. Building a human being. The intelligence officers quickly realized something important. People are not remembered by passports, they're remembered by ordinary details. So they began creating those details. Major Martin carried worn theater ticket stubs in his pockets. He had receipts from restaurants in London, a set of keys, personal letters, a bank notice, even small everyday inconveniences that made him feel real. But the most convincing detail was a young woman. Her name was Pam. She wasn't actually his fiancée. She wasn't even aware she was part of one of the most secret military operations of the war. A photograph of her rested inside his wallet. Alongside it were affectionate handwritten letters filled with everyday emotions. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Just the kind of messages exchanged between two people planning a future together. British intelligence believed these personal items would become more convincing than the military documents themselves. Because spies can fake orders. But love letters, those are much harder to invent. The documents that could never be real. Once Major Martin's personal life had been completed, attention turned to the documents. These papers had to contain information valuable enough for Germany to act upon, but believable enough that senior commanders would never question them. The letters suggested that Allied forces intended to invade Greece and Sardinia. Sicily appeared only as a diversion, exactly the opposite of reality. If Germany accepted the story, thousands of soldiers would be moved away from Sicily. If Germany rejected it, the invasion would become far more dangerous. Months of planning now rested on one impossible gamble. Would the enemy believe a dead man? What happened next would become one of the boldest intelligence operations ever attempted. But before the plan could succeed, Major William Martin had to begin the final journey of his fictional life. The dead man who fooled Hitler. Part 2, The Body That Crossed the Sea. The final journey on the night of April 19, 1943, the British submarine HMS Seraph quietly slipped away from the Scottish coast. Unlike most military missions, its crew wasn't transporting weapons, or soldiers, or supplies. Hidden inside a sealed steel container was the body of Major William Martin, a man who had never lived. Only the commanding officer and a handful of crew members knew the truth. Everyone else believed they were carrying highly classified cargo. The voyage would take several days. Every mile brought new risks. Enemy aircraft constantly patrolled the sea. German submarines hunted Allied vessels beneath the waves. Even rough weather could destroy the operation before it had truly begun. If the body was damaged, if the documents became wet, or if the submarine was forced to dive suddenly, months of planning could disappear beneath the Mediterranean forever. For the men aboard the Seraph, silence became as important as survival. A carefully chosen destination. The destination wasn't random. British intelligence selected the coast near Huelva in southern Spain for one very specific reason. Spain officially remained neutral during the war, but neutrality didn't mean loyalty. German intelligence maintained an extensive spy network throughout the country. British planners knew that any military documents recovered there would almost certainly find their way into Nazi hands. That was exactly what they wanted. The challenge was making sure it happened naturally. No witnesses, no suspicious behavior, no signs that the body had been placed there intentionally. Everything had to look like a tragic accident. As dawn approached on April 30th, the submarine surfaced just offshore. The crew gathered on deck. A brief prayer was read. Then the body of Major William Martin was gently released into the water. Within moments, the current carried him away. The submarine disappeared beneath the waves. Now there was nothing left to do, except wait. A fisherman's discovery hours. Later, a local fisherman noticed something unusual floating in the water. As he moved closer, he realized it was a body wearing a military uniform. Authorities were immediately notified. Spanish officials recovered the corpse and carefully searched his belongings. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. A wallet, personal letters, keys, receipts, photographs. Nothing seemed staged, nothing looked artificial. To everyone who examined him, Major William Martin appeared to be exactly who his documents claimed he was. A British officer whose aircraft had crashed into the sea while carrying confidential material. But British intelligence wasn't interested in convincing the Spanish. Their real audience was waiting in Berlin. the secret everyone was supposed to steal. As expected, German intelligence quickly learned about the discovery. Their agents in Spain quietly requested access to the recovered documents. The sealed envelope attached to Major Martin's briefcase contained confidential correspondence between senior British commanders. Without opening the original seals permanently, skilled technicians carefully photographed every page, every sentence, every signature, every military reference. The documents painted a convincing picture. The Allies were supposedly preparing their main assault against Greece. Sardinia would also be attacked. Sicily? Only a diversion. Exactly the conclusion British intelligence wanted Germany to reach. Once the photographs had been taken, the documents were carefully resealed and returned to Spanish authorities. At first glance, it looked as though nobody had touched them. Waiting for the impossible back in London, nobody celebrated. In fact, the most stressful part of the operation had only just begun. British intelligence had no direct way of knowing whether Germany believed the deception. For days, nothing happened. No intercepted messages, no unusual troop movements, only silence. The officers responsible for Operation Mincemeat began questioning every decision they had made. Had the Germans noticed something strange? Had the Spanish become suspicious? Had the documents reached the wrong people? Weeks of uncertainty followed. Every morning brought the same question. Had the plan failed? Then, one intercepted communication changed everything. The first signs of success. British codebreakers secretly reading encrypted German communications through the ultra-intelligence program began noticing subtle changes. German commanders were discussing possible Allied operations against Greece. Additional reconnaissance flights were ordered. Defensive planning started shifting eastward. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough to spark cautious optimism. Soon afterward, even larger changes appeared. Troops began moving, equipment followed. Military resources that might have defended Sicily were being reassigned elsewhere. Every intercepted message confirmed the same astonishing conclusion. Germany wasn't simply examining the fake documents. They were acting on them. But there was still one man whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. If he remained unconvinced, the entire deception could still collapse. That man was Adolf Hitler. His final decision would determine whether Operation Mincemeat became one of history's greatest intelligence victories, or one of its most ambitious failures. The Dead Man Who Fooled Hitler. Part 3, The Lie That Reached Hitler a Decision at the Highest Level. As the copied documents moved through the German intelligence network, they eventually reached the desks of senior military officials. Experienced analysts examined every page, every signature, every date. Nothing appeared unusual. The letters matched authentic British military writing. The paper looked genuine. Even the personal items found on Major Martin made the story feel believable. To German intelligence, this wasn't a planted deception. It looked like an incredible stroke of luck. One officer reportedly described the discovery as an intelligence treasure. Soon, the documents were forwarded to the highest levels of the German command, including Adolf Hitler, Hitler's greatest fear. By 1943, Hitler understood that the Allies would soon invade southern Europe. The question wasn't if they would attack, it was where. He had several possibilities to consider: Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Greece, the Balkans. Each location required thousands of soldiers, artillery pieces, aircraft, fuel, ammunition, and defensive fortifications. Germany didn't have enough resources to defend every possible target equally. That meant every decision carried enormous risk. The documents recovered from Major Martin seemed to answer the question. According to the letters, Sicily wasn't the primary objective. The real invasion would come through Greece. To Hitler, the explanation made strategic sense. Control of Greece could threaten Germany's southern flank and open new supply routes through the Balkans. The deception matched his own expectations, and that's what made it so dangerous. People often believe information more easily when it confirms what they already suspect. British intelligence understood this perfectly. Germany changes its plans within days. Orders began spreading across occupied Europe. Additional troops were sent toward Greece. Military engineers strengthened defenses in the eastern Mediterranean. Aircraft were repositioned. Naval patrols expanded. Even armored units were redirected. Every movement meant fewer soldiers available to defend Sicily. British code breakers monitored these developments through intercepted German communications. Each new message confirmed the same astonishing reality. Operation Mincemeat wasn't merely confusing the enemy, it was reshaping Germany's entire defensive strategy. The deception had become reality. Yet no one inside British intelligence allowed themselves to celebrate. Not yet. Because the most dangerous moment still lay ahead, the invasion itself. Operation Husky begins. In the early hours of July 10, 1943, thousands of Allied soldiers crossed the Mediterranean. More than 2,500 ships supported the assault. Aircraft filled the skies. Paratroopers descended behind enemy lines. The operation became known as Operation Husky. For many soldiers packed inside landing craft, there was no way of knowing whether the deception had worked. They expected overwhelming resistance. Many believed they might not survive the day. As the first waves reached the beaches of Sicily, fighting quickly erupted. German and Italian defenders resisted fiercely in several areas. Explosions echoed across the coastline. Smoke covered the beaches. But something unexpected soon became clear. The German response was weaker than many Allied commanders had feared. Several experienced formations had already been repositioned elsewhere. Resources that could have reinforced Sicily simply weren't there. The deception hadn't eliminated the danger, but it had changed the battlefield before the first shot was fired. A victory written months earlier. The invasion of Sicily lasted for weeks. The campaign remained difficult. Thousands of soldiers on both sides lost their lives. Yet the Allies successfully secured the island. Its capture marked one of the most significant turning points of the war. From Sicily, Allied forces would continue their advance into mainland Italy. Only weeks later, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was removed from power after more than 2 decades of rule. While many factors contributed to these events, historians widely agree that Operation Mincemeat played an important role in misleading German leadership at a critical moment. It demonstrated something remarkable. Wars are fought on battlefields, but they are also fought inside the minds of commanders. Sometimes changing what an enemy believes can be just as powerful as defeating them in combat. The secret remains hidden. Despite its success, almost nobody knew the operation had ever existed. The British government classified nearly every detail. The men who planned the mission returned to their normal duties. The officers who carried out the deception rarely spoke about it. Even many military personnel involved in the invasion never learned why German defenses had been unexpectedly weakened. The identity of Major William Martin remained official. As far as the world knew, he had lived, he had served, and he had died carrying secret military documents. The greatest lie of the operation continued long after the war itself, but secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried forever. Decades later, historians would begin uncovering the astonishing truth behind the man who never existed.
The Dead Man Who Fooled Hitler, Part 4. The Man Behind the Legend. A secret buried for decades. When World War II finally came to an end, Millions of people celebrated peace. Nations began rebuilding. Soldiers returned home. Families searched for loved ones who would never come back. But hidden inside British government archives was one story that almost no one knew. Operation Mincemeat remained classified. The files were locked away. The people who planned the mission rarely spoke about it. For years, the world believed that Major William Martin had been exactly who his military papers claimed he was. Even his grave in Spain carried that name. Visitors placed flowers on the tomb of a man who had never actually existed. The deception had become part of history itself. The real man. Decades later, historians finally uncovered the truth. The body used in Operation Mincemeat belonged to Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh man who had lived a difficult and often forgotten life. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't a military hero. He had grown up in poverty, struggled to find stable work, and eventually died in London in early 1943. At the time of his death, almost no one could have imagined that history would remember him. Yet after his passing, his body became the center of one of the most remarkable intelligence operations ever conceived. British authorities treated his remains with dignity throughout the mission, and many historians emphasize that the operation reflected the extraordinary circumstances of a global war rather than a disregard for the individual. Today, many people see Glyndwr Michael as an unlikely participant in an operation that helped shape history. Did Operation Mincemeat really change the war? This question continues to fascinate historians. Could one elaborate deception truly influence the outcome of a conflict involving millions of soldiers? Most experts agree on one important point. Operation Mincemeat did not win World War II by itself. No single operation ever could. The Allied victory resulted from countless battles, industrial production, intelligence breakthroughs, and enormous sacrifices made across many nations. However, there is broad historical agreement that Operation Mincemeat successfully convinced German leaders that Greece and Sardinia deserved greater attention than Sicily. That decision affected how German forces were deployed before the Allied invasion. Military deception had achieved exactly what it was designed to do. Not by destroying enemy forces, but by influencing enemy decisions. And sometimes that can change everything. The power of belief operation. Mincemeat teaches an extraordinary lesson. People often imagine history being shaped by the strongest armies or the most powerful weapons. Yet this operation reminds us that ideas can be just as powerful. The British did not force Hitler to move his troops. They persuaded him to do it himself. Every fake receipt, every personal letter, every carefully folded document, every tiny detail helped create a story so convincing that experienced intelligence officers accepted it as reality. The success of the operation depended less on forged documents and more on understanding human psychology, because intelligence work has never been only about collecting information. It has always been about influencing how other people interpret it, a legacy that lives on today. Operation Mincemeat is studied in military academies around the world as one of history's finest examples of strategic deception. It has inspired books, documentaries, and films, not because it featured spectacular battles, but because it proved that creativity, patience, and psychological insight could alter the course of events on a global scale. More than 80 years later, historians are still uncovering new details about the operation. Each discovery reminds us that history is rarely as simple as it first appears. Behind many famous events lie hidden stories that remained buried for decades, stories that challenge what we think we know, stories that reveal the human side of extraordinary decisions, and stories that deserve to be remembered. Closing history, is filled with forgotten operations, impossible missions, and remarkable people whose names rarely appear in textbooks. Some changed the world with armies, others changed it with words, and one man changed it after he was already gone. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter of history, you're in the right place, because here at Obscurum Atlas, we explore the stories hidden behind the headlines, the forgotten missions, the secret operations, and the extraordinary people who quietly changed the course of history. Subscribe and join us as we uncover the hidden side of the past. Because the greatest stories in history are often the ones that were never meant to be found.